Hey there, and welcome to Between the Lines. I'm your host, Chris White, and this is the podcast where we look between the lines of this past Sunday's message, and we look a little bit more into what it was that we were looking at and talking about. And we've been right in the middle of our series on Daniel. We're actually week 4. And Pastor Aaron, you brought the message again this past week.
Yep.
And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. So how have you been doing? How's your week been?
Week's been going good so far. Kind of busy. So we had some staff time today. And after this podcast is over, I'm going to be heading out to a soccer game.
Okay.
And it is the last soccer game of the season. And so
Nice.
Landon told me today that he was a little sad.
Mm-hmm.
Season's over, but he's had a good year, you know.
Good.
And I told him I think he gets a trophy or a medal or something like that, you know.
there
So
you go.
that should
There you
make him a
go.
little bit more exciting. So
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, trophies are always like that's the goal point, right?
Yeah,
To get
we
there.
broke one like a year ago that he got, and so like we've tried to like
Do you have to
hot
go
glue
buy
it.
a new one?
No, we've tried to like glue it together and stuff like that, and to no success on that, you know. So he
Yeah.
asks about it all the time. I'm pretty sure we've thrown it away.
Ooh,
you know,
ooh.
I'm
Hopefully
like,
he's not listening to the podcast.
you know, yeah. Hopefully he's not tuning in today, and hopefully nobody tells him. Okay, so you know, to all the listeners.
Gotcha. So we like to start each week with something a little bit more fun, lighthearted, and so it's getting cool outside.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of the fall season, especially this past weekend. It was really cool this
Yeah, it
past
was.
weekend. So I wanted to see what are some things. Do you have anything that you like to do during the fall season? Any favorite part of that season or traditions?
Yeah. So as far as the family goes, some of the things that we like to do. So the last several years we've done pigeon roost. You know, have you ever been out to pigeon
Yeah.
roost? So that's kind of always a fun Saturday afternoon, corn maze, you know, some hay rides, just some things like that. And so that's what we enjoy locally.
Okay.
Now I'm from Michigan.
Yeah.
And we have way better apple orchards in
You
Michigan.
say this all the
Well,
time.
because we have apple orchards. It's like here, like it's just not the same. I'm telling you.
We have apple orchards.
Yeah, it just I don't know. Like
All
I mean,
the
there's
apple
like
farmers out there listening.
Yeah, I'm sorry to offend you, but you should go to Michigan and check out what a real apple orchard looks like. And it's not even the apples. Like I don't like
Okay.
go picking apples.
Uh-huh.
It's the donuts. And the donuts they have, I mean, they're amazing. You know, and down here everybody seems to like pumpkin. You know, like we have like
Yes.
the pumpkin show, so it's like, oh, we got to eat a pumpkin donut. No.
Yeah.
I mean, like
Apple
apple cider.
donuts.
Yeah, well, no, they're not apple
They're not apple
donuts.
donuts, or
They're like
just- what are
cinnamon
they?
donuts.
Okay.
And I mean, you warm them up. I mean, I could eat a dozen of them at
Okay.
a time, and you get some apple cider with. I shouldn't eat a dozen of them at a time, but I could if I
We're
really.
gonna
needed
talk about
some.
that later.
Yeah, well, yeah, gluttony or something like that, you know. But that was some apple cider. That is awesome. And then when we sometimes when we're up in Michigan in the fall, we also go to Three Cedars Farm. They have
Okay.
the donuts, and they've got some hay rides and stuff like that. So we always enjoy that. So,
Gotcha.
You know, a couple things that we try to do every year.
Yeah, I will say, like, we were talking about this a couple weeks back, and so we went to a fruit farm here locally to pick some apples.
That's the first
They
sign
didn't-
a fruit farm. Like
Yeah.
it's an apple orchard, you know. Like I mean, if you call yourself a fruit farm, you're not an
Well,
apple orchard.
they got to carry stuff other than apples,
maybe.
you know. But they didn't have apple donuts. They didn't have all they had was pumpkin donuts, and I had
That's
like
it?
I gotten hyped that I was gonna try one
a
of these
cinnamon-
like cinnamon
yeah.
donut.
Oh, yeah.
and it was a pumpkin donut, which it was good. I'll give you that. Pumpkin donuts are good in their own right, but
Yeah.
like it wasn't. It was a little weird
No.
to be at an apple orchard eating a pumpkin donut, but it's
Not the
okay.
same.
It's fine.
I guess so.
It works.
What do you do? What do you do in the fall? Do you guys have any traditions?
Yeah, so we always go apple picking.
Okay.
We do that. We normally do the pumpkin show down in Circleville. That's usually a big thing.
We do that too.
Yeah, but obviously this year that's
I
not
only like the
happening.
food at the pumpkin. show,
Exactly.
though. Yeah.
Why else do you go?
Yeah,
Like,
and it's not even the pumpkin food necessarily that I like.
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
the
so.
bourbon chicken. And
That
you
is my
gotta get the
favorite.
right. So you're the one who told me about that one.
It's the one in the back.
Yep.
And you skip all the other ones. It's not worth it, but you gotta go to the back.
Got to
so,
go there.
Yeah.
Good food. Yeah, it's always a great time. So we enjoy doing that. Also, it is football season.
It is football
And
season.
there for a while, we didn't think we were going to have a football season.
Exactly.
But we did.
We have football now.
But we have football starting soon. And even though it looks different, can you tell us who's your favorite? For those that don't know, who's your favorite college football team?
I mean, I'm definitely a Michigan fan, born
Okay.
and raised, and it has been extremely difficult. I mean, like the listeners should be feeling bad for me right now. Like
you've been pretty persecuted. right?
I mean, like, yeah. I mean, like, I know what persecution is.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's living here as a Michigan fan, and it's rough. We've only been good like once in like the 15 years that was here, and that was like the first year we were here.
Yeah.
And we used to work concessions. I don't know if, you know, some people may not know this, but we used to work concessions, and it was miserable because here when you work concessions, they make you wear the Ohio State stuff. So I just want you guys, I mean, this is just how committed I am to the kingdom of God and to ministry, okay? Like, I mean, like I would wear like an Ohio State hat.
Do you wear like a jersey under
so
it?
I
like,
always wore a shirt underneath it that was Michigan. And if there was by chance, like especially the Michigan Ohio State games, like when we had to work those, when Michigan fans would come up, I mean, in the appropriate way, I would flash them.
Your Michigan
you know, but it's my
jersey.
Michigan shirt. And I'd be like, I'm really a Michigan fan. Don't tell anybody. But it's rough living here as like a Michigan fan. I mean, I've been booed walking through the malls. I've been booed sitting in restaurants. And Abby didn't know how bad it was until the first year we started dating. And we're walking through the store, and she's like, "Why are those people talking to you?" And I'm like, "They're booing me." And she's like, "Why?" And I'm like, because I have Michigan on.
Oh,
wow.
Wow.
And I hear it's true. You're not really a fan of any team, so you picked Ohio State. Is that
I don't think that's the story
not,
that goes there, but I'm an Ohio State fan.
Kind of. I mean, you grew up in North Carolina.
I did,
I mean, then you were in Mississippi. So, I mean, North Carolina or Mississippi makes more sense.
Yeah, but there wasn't a good team in North Carolina. So, and then Mississippi, no, not a bandwagon.
I don't know.
It was all for good heart. You know, Paul says you're to be everything to all people, and I'm here, and I mean, I'm devoted to the people that we're ministering to. Some may not be, but
I think we talked about convictions a couple weeks ago, and and like this is a conviction of mine. I mean, like be true to where you came from. So that's just part of it.
I will say this, like you guys get it, like you get definitely from the people here, from the you guys get a lot of heat for being Michigan fans, and you've stuck to it.
That's right.
And you guys are good sports. I'll give you. You take it.
That's right.
It's good. Right. So
go blue.
All right, I won't pull out that.
Yeah, we just lost all the audience. They just turned us off. So if you're still there, thank you for being a faithful listener today.
All right, so we'll get into the point of today's podcast and kind of talk about the series from this past Sunday. And so you started with the story of Belshazzar. Yeah. Hopefully I pronounced that right. That's a weird name.
It is a weird one.
And it's the story of the writing on the wall. And I remember, hearing about this story as a kid and reading about it in Sunday school. We used to have these Nest videos that we would watch as kids, and there was like this whole part of the story is in there, and the hand comes down and writes on the wall, which the whole idea is just weird. Like it would be, you can see why the guy's scared. And so in this, we see the hand come down, it writes on the wall, and this is such an impactful story that this is a phrase we've used ever since. Like when you see the writing on the wall to talk about, hey, this is proof of something, or it's showing a sign of this happening. And so what I want to ask you is that what are some signs or writing on the wall that you think many of us may see that shows that we are not using our time wisely? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, a handful of these we kind of talked about Sunday, is that, the handwriting on the wall kind of says, hey, there's kind of doom on the horizon. Mm-hmm. But I think the comforting fact of it is if we can be aware of that, we can make some changes in the midst of it, Mm-hmm. And I think this is God's grace to us. It's just another grace that he gives. I mean, we talked a little bit about Sunday that before judgment, God really wants to give us warnings, and look at all these biblical stories,
Mm-hmm.
Before Sodom and Gomorrah, there was a warning, before the flood, there was a warning,
Mm-hmm.
like God wants to warn us because that he loves us. He cares about us inside of our lives. And so, sometimes we're like, well, that's just judgment. Well, no, God gives us warnings. And then when we don't heed those warnings, there's a penalty to pay for it, and I mean, I use the tire analogy on Sunday. It's the same thing with like your oil in your car. Like, hey, the light comes on. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that tomorrow it's going to be a problem, but unchecked, it's going to be something there. And so we talked about some of these warning signs, and we talked about sometimes like more temptation coming into our life. Like when we start getting off balance spiritually, a warning sign I really do think is like, man, it just seems like I'm being tempted around every corner, or there's other opportunities to sin, and it's like I'm all of a sudden starting to think about those things. And so sometimes that's a warning sign. Like, hey, I haven't given into this sin. But man, that sin seems a lot more possible,
yes.
Whether that's hey, I'm going to move these numbers on a tax income form, or I'm not going to be fully truthful in this moment, And so all of a sudden, so that becomes a warning sign that something's not right in our soul. And like, wow, something may be off in my relationship with God. I mean, that's one of them. We talked about inconsistent emotions, and I think this becomes, hey, we're not using our time wisely. There's some things that are the writing on the wall, inconsistent emotions, I'm angry all the time. I'm flying off the handle. I lack joy inside of my life. Here's a warning sign. You keep going down this path, and there's going to be some danger on the other side of it. We talked about being less productive, and I mean, this is one I think we all should kind of like see a little bit more. I mean, and I even as I was prepping for this message, like there was a day this week I looked at Abby and I was just like, man, I feel like I'm busy, but I'm just not productive. When I say those words, and here's the problem is we're sometimes just not aware of it, and like I'm going through this message and I'm like, okay, what else is why is that the case? What am I doing with my time? How am I using that wisely? And then I think when we can't hear God, I mean, those are some of those warning signs that, we talked about Sunday is, the voice of God doesn't seem to be as clear. It's because we're not using our time wisely. We're not setting time aside for personal devotions and those things. We're allowing the noise of this world to kind of fill up our lives. And it's like, okay, where does noise come? It comes from being too busy, getting too stressed out, being overwhelmed because we're running a million places, and these become warning signs in our life. Like, you know what? I should at least pause in the midst of this and go, what needs to change? And this is important right now, I think, in our society. And I mean, like, I sit here talking about this, Chris, and like, I'm sitting here going like I've had these warning signs so many times, and and maybe even the last couple of weeks, when I talk about being less productive and some of those things, I'm just like, yeah.
And I think that's like, you talk about this being important in our society. Like it is a big thing that we just allow ourselves to get too busy. And we've talked about that kind of throughout this series. And choosing our time wisely. I know that for me, we talk about warning signs and the writing on the wall. Like for me, a big thing as I've gotten older is watching my family and the way I interact with my family. Because I can tell like when I get short with my kids or I begin to see like, arguments with my wife or things that normally wouldn't be a thing. I can immediately start to go, now it becomes a warning sign where years ago it may have been like, it got way past that point. But now I can start to see from just a wisdom perspective, I guess, is like, hey, I'm getting to a place, like obviously I'm not setting things up in the right order in my life. I need to spend more time with God today, or I need to do these things because it's resulting in this.
And those are emotions, when you talk about those things, like those are inconsistent emotions when you're like, that's not me, and sometimes, I mean, the hard part is like our family, our kids, like our spouses, sometimes they see it before we do. And I think walking in a little bit of humility and sometimes that, because I don't know about you, but there's sometimes I'm just like, no, that's not the case, and because I'm in such an inconsistent place with my emotions that it's like it's like that becomes an inconsistent, like, no, that's not, you're just making that up, whatever, and we have to see it, and I'm seeing it more, your kids are a little bit older than mine. I see it in Landon some days, and I mean, even, I'll be honest, just in the last like week or so, there's some moments he's come to me, he's like, Dad, when are we going to do this together? And like, it's like a gut punch.
Oh yeah.
But you know what, that's also like in my head. And even as like, I'm working through these things, I mean, and that's all messages are kind of, when I always tell people, like, I'm preaching to myself as much as I'm preaching to them. And I'm not a professional in these yet. I mean, if I wait to speak on something until I have it down,
be a long time.
I mean, we're never going to get to them, So like, it's like, I'm telling you at the same thing of things I'm working on in my own life. And I mean, even this week, there's probably been 2 times that Landon's just like, when are we, and I'm going, okay, what do I have to rearrange? Because maybe I'm not using my time wisely enough in the sense of what's important.
So good. And I think it's good that you mentioned that. I think a lot of times people think that ministers or preachers, that we've got it all figured out, and that when we're bringing a message, it's, we figured this out. God's teaching us, at least I know in my life, like as much in the process of learning this and teaching this as he is everyone else out there. I
hope everybody realizes we don't have it figured out. Like it's a daily walk with Christ, and some days are better than others, on the same side of it. And that's just the reality of it, and if people are looking for a perfect church or a perfect pastor, you better keep looking. I guess don't stop here. You
won't find one.
And that's the thing, you're not going to, and so it's so important. So
you may mention in the message that we forget that our days are numbered. And that's such a powerful, and that's part of what was written on the wall, is that numbered. And so, what do you think causes us to believe that we have forever to do things in life? I know that the older I get, the more that I realize that time is short. But even so, I still lose track of those essential things and what I'm focusing on. So what do you think causes that thought process of us like losing track of that, you think?
I mean, I think there's like several things. I mean, one, I think, is our cultural perspective, like, you know, I mean, what do we hear early on? Oh, you're young, you have the rest of your life to live. And then all of a sudden we're not young anymore, you know? Like I tell people all the time, like I like to refer to myself as young. And then I realize like where I'm getting on the age chart. And I'm just like, I'm not young anymore, you know? Like, I mean, hopefully I have still a long time to live, but even if I, you know, if I can live to 8, I'm getting close where half my life is over, you know, and you start looking back, you know? And so I think what caused us to lose track of that is, you know, I mean, one is a mentality, you know, like, oh, you're young, just live life, do all these things. And then before we know it, like we've been living life for, you know, doing all these things that, oh, I was just doing it because I was young. It was my opportunity to, and we're no longer young and we haven't done anything with purpose inside of our life. The other thing is a lot of what we talked about Sunday, and maybe it's just poor perspective, you know, and I talked about how when we think we have a lot, we squander it. And this is just how we look at life. We think we have a lot of life and it just goes, you know, and what we have a lot of, we squander. What we realize that we have a little bit of, we steward it. And, you know, and so it's a change of perspective, you know? And so, yeah, okay, maybe some people listening, you know, hey, maybe you got 60 years if, you know, if God doesn't come back and God allows it, you know, maybe you get to live to your 80, 90 years old. You maybe have another 60 or 70 years. Some people listening, maybe they have 15 or 20 years. But whether you have 60 or 15 or 20, it's really not that much. It goes by so quick. And so how do we use it wisely? You know, even as we're sitting here today, you know, was literally with the family this morning. Hospice had been called in, you know, I mean, and I guess in this side of what we do, like I see the shortness of what, you know, like it's a regular thing, you know, and hospice is called in, with them this morning, prayed with them. And by the time I got back to the church, he had passed, you know, and I didn't see that coming. Like I wasn't like, oh, this, you know, this is going to happen this soon, but that's how quick life goes, you know? And so our perspective is, man, it's short, you know? So how do we realize that wherever we're at in this equation, let's use it wisely, you know, in 40 years, 60 years, whatever we have, let's not squander it. When you have kids, you see it quickly. Like I don't, you know, you put a kid's perspective, Landon 6. And I'm like, I really got 12 more years with him under my roof. Like that's crazy. You know, I mean, how old's Becca now?
Becca's 12.
She's 12?
13.
Almost 13. I mean, you know.
5 or 6 years.
5 or 6 years you may have it. And like, you and Shelly got married young, right?
We did. We were kids. I was 18 when 18? We got married.
So, I mean, she could be married in 5 years. I mean, do you think? I mean,
no.
that's right. But I mean, how short is it? You know? And it's like, you know, we think we have all this time with our kids.
And it goes quick.
We've got 18 years to probably help to steward the gift of them to us, and it's a perspective on time, you know.
I heard something interesting about that, like with it actually was another podcast I was listening to, but they were talking about like
a different one than this one. I thought this was the only podcast to listen to, Chris. Yeah.
But like they were talking about, you know, stages of kids' lives and how, you know, how fast it happens, and how a lot of times as parents we get caught up in like the teenage stage because we always feel like we're arguing with them, we're trying to convince them, and really that's the stage where they're becoming an adult, and so you got to almost let them make some decisions, and you've got to be there it's more of a guiding thing. Like you hope at that point you've kind of instilled enough to create the foundation. But I think like I've gotten there with Becca to where I realize now like she's gonna have to make some decisions, and I can't, and that gets so hard, but it really makes you put it into perspective of like, this is a very short amount of time. And, you know, are we using it wisely to, you know, instill these things into our kids, and are we discipling our family well? And I think that's that, you know, learning to shorten that measuring stick a little bit and realize, okay, it's not really as much as I think it is. And it really makes you go, okay, I need to take these moments. I need to, you know, take this 30 minutes that I can take right now to have this conversation.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I think that there's so much power in that. As you continue teaching, you went on to talk about how we allow our lives to get out of balance. Yeah. Right. And so in today's culture, I hear this talked about a lot. Balance, work-life balance is a huge thing. Like it's a big topic that you hear about. Are we balancing? Are we working too much or not enough, or, you know, what all that looks like? But I think balance here is even deeper when we look into this story. I think there's a spiritual life and physical life balance. And so these two are at odds with each other. You know, Scripture tells us this all throughout, you know, that your spiritual man is always battling your physical man and what he wants to do. And so how do we truly balance these two? And, you know, what's the right answer to that balance? And maybe there's not a right answer, but like what's some direction in that? How do we keep the balance?
Yeah, you know, obviously talking about balance is a huge thing, you know. I mean, we hire coaches now to, you know, talk about the balance. You know, in the passage of scripture there that we were looking at, it says, you know, you step on the scale and you're found wanting, you know, like, you know, it's the scale is out of balance, you know, of your time and what you're doing with your life and those types of things, you know. So how do we you know, balance the physical and the spirit? I think it was you know, kind of said there,
yeah.
you know, and I guess a little bit of is, while that's the terms that we often think in, you know, I would go back to a passage of scripture where the Bible talks about love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, you know. And so it's this whole part of us, you know. And maybe some of the issue, Chris, is some of that too, is that we're trying to figure out how to balance some areas of our lives with faith and these different things, when maybe really there's this part of it that does have to merge together, and we have to understand that all of life, I mean, the word that I would use here, you know, I mean, we might say spiritual, that all life is spiritual, or how do we invite God into every moment? And if we can invite God into every moment of our life, no matter where we're at, I think we'll find more balance in it, you know. But when we try to kind of separate these things and go, this is my family, this is, you know, this is my spiritual life, and I think then we do get out of balance, because to be honest with you, there's not enough areas on the scale to put all those things, you know, and so we run out of time. You know, and so I think, at least for me, like when I think about like these balance, it's for me to continue to go, God, how do I invite you into every moment? And, you know, and I mean, like you said, we could use the word spiritual. Sometimes people are kind of like, oh, what does that look like? Like, oh, you're super spiritual. No. How do I invite God into every moment? So if I'm going to find balance in my life, I'm going to invite you, God, into this family moment. I'm going to invite you into this relationship moment. I'm going to invite you into my marriage. I'm going to invite you into my finances. I'm going to invite you into my work. And I'm going to allow that to be this part of the scale that, yes, is my spiritual life, but the spiritual and the physical kind of start merging together a little bit more, where it's not compartmentalized, you know. And I think, you know, sometimes we try to compartmentalize, and I think we've even talked about that a little bit. That can be a struggle at times. You know, how do I invite God into my parenting? How do I invite him into these moments of my day? And I think it'll help bring some balance. You know, I don't know. You know, like you said, it's a hard question sometimes. Like, how do we find that? You know, as ministers, I mean, is working in churches sometimes. It can seem like sometimes we shift all the way to one side, you know, it's like all, you know, church and ministry related, you know, and we're kind of going, how do we do this on our families and stuff like that? And I think the healthy place is eventually go, like, they do kind of merge together a little bit, you know. We take every moment as that opportunity. So
I think that's the key inside of that, is that when we become followers of Christ, when we make that decision, he asks for all of us. Like, he's not asking for a part. He's not asking, I need you on Sunday mornings, or I need you in these moments. He needs you all the time. And so that does merge those two. And I think that answers the question about balance, because when you put him first, right? And we're going to get into that here in just a second, but when we put him first, he balances the scale, because he is the one that's always there in everything. And I think that is the key to understanding that, is it isn't always a separation, but it is an understanding that God is the central focus, and everything else kind of gets added in.
Every opportunity in life is a moment for God to step into, you know, and it's not just Sundays, you know, and I think we got to be very clear about that, you know. And so if we're just trying to fit God into Sundays, then it just seems like another thing in our schedules, you know. But if he's a part of every day of our life, you know, our families and everything, I think we find a little bit more balance in it.
True. So at the close of this message, you used an illustration about putting first things first. You used rice and ping pong balls, and you talked, you know, you showed if we try to put the ping pong balls in the jar of rice, they don't fit, right? But if you flip-flop it, you put the ping pong balls in, then the rice will fit around it. And you use that analogy to talk about, we have to put first things first. We have to put God and faith. That has to be first, and then all of the other things will kind of fit in. The exact quote you used, I really like this quote. It says that order determines capacity. And so can you break that down for us a little bit more today? Because I think there's a lot of power inside of that.
Yeah, so order determines capacity, you know. If you think about even just like packing something away, you know, I mean, a lot of times they'll tell you, hey, put the bigger items in. And then when you have these little spaces, then you figure out where to kind of get those, you know. So if you're packing like on a trip or whatever, you know, you kind of start with some of those items, and then you, in the little spaces, you put those things, you know. And so the order that we set up our life, the priorities that we make inside of our life, is going to create the capacity for the other things. And we talked about in that moment that so often we live our lives on default. And so default mode is going to fill up our lives with a lot of things that really aren't that important. if we're just kind of going through those things. And so, I made this comment Sunday, and, hopefully it registered a little bit. It's better to live on design than by default.
Yes.
Like, God has a design. God has a plan for our lives. And so if he has a design for us, we should live our lives with a little bit more intention. And if we're getting intentional about life, we're going to take the priorities of our life and we're going to say, these are necessities. I can't move away from these things. And then say, God, whatever else you want to put into my life, hey, there's space for those things. And, and then those extra things are going to kind of be added to it. But too often we're allowing all the extra things to consume our time. And then we get to the end of the week, we get to the end of the night, and then we give the very least to God, our family, our marriages, our friendships, those types of things that maybe are important, because we've allowed everything else to fill up. And then you know what we're doing? We're living stressed out lives.
Yeah.
We are living stressed out lives. And so I think it's so important that we kind of live by the design and not on default. If we live on default, let me just give some examples of default. You'll find yourself going, man, I just watched 4 hours of TV and abandoned my family. I just, spent all this time doing something that just didn't have a lot of purpose to it. And at the end of the evening, I went to bed and went, what did I do with my life today? But that's just on default. Like, it's easy to get caught up in the TV shows. It's easy to get caught up in the mundane. But if I begin to live on purpose, I'm sitting there going, okay, how am I investing in my family today? How am I investing into my faith? These are priorities in my life. And once those things are done, then, if I've got time for these extra things or for these moments, then my life can be filled up with those. And I think God has a way, when we get those priorities right, that he does fill our life. He fills our lives up with so many other great things.
Yes.
Because he does have a design for us, and we are made by God for purpose and by purpose. Like all of us were created for a specific purpose. We need to figure out those priorities, and so I would encourage people, just a practical, make a list of what really are priorities. And maybe for some people, you just need to every day go, have I checked this off? How have I invested into my marriage today? How have I invested into my kids? What am I doing with my finances? How am I investing into ministry and my faith and my relationship with Jesus Christ? And maybe once you get all those checked off, go, okay, now what else? Now what else do I have time for? And you may find that you're going, wow, I'm getting more done and I'm more fulfilled in life because order determines capacity. And I've got the important things done, and I'm not coming to the end of the day going, man, if I just had another hour, I would have got this. I would have been able to do this with my family or something. You're going, I got all those things done. And I bet you'll get to the end of the day and go, I got an hour now. I'm going to relax. I'm going to do some of these things, but order determines capacity. It's another area. I don't have it completely done, but these are things that I'm kind of even trying to work through of going, okay, what are those priorities? How do I check them off every day? Make space for those things.
So true. Preparation, putting things in priority. I think all of that is so important into to reaching our purpose. I think, I work with a lot with young adults, and I think having that conversation a lot of what's my purpose and how do I get to the thing that I'm supposed to do. And that's one of the biggest things I say is find some structure, put some things in practice, because that consistency will get you to that purpose. You just have to be consistent and do those things. Yep. As always, we like to ask, if there's one point this week that really stuck out to you, what would it be? What's something you would say?
Real simple. It was the last point of it. Whatever you're hearing, whatever you need to change in your life, whatever priorities you need to shift, do it now. You're never going to get started unless you do it today. So whatever you're in there, do it today. The Bible says today is the day of God's favor. Today is the day of salvation. Do it today. Do it now. Maybe you didn't do it Sunday and you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I should have done that. Do it today. Start today somewhere, small steps, big priorities, get some structure, and don't waste your time. Your days are numbered. Do it today. Make the most of it.
Awesome. Thank you, Pastor Aaron, for joining us today for this week's Between the Lines. Hey, thank you guys so much for watching, for tuning in, for sharing. You guys have been great. We just want to encourage you, if you're watching this on YouTube, to like it, share it out. If you're listening on iTunes, be sure to give us a rating and a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And be sure to join us right back here next week for Between the Lines.